Welcome to tonight's United Front Radio. I'm Daniela Walls, National Chair of the Tax Wall Street Party, with Kyle McCarthy, founding member of the United Front Against Austerity. Tonight we are joined by Stuart Hooper, and I'm going to let you pronounce it, Stuart, the district you're in England. But you're a candidate for Parliament on a similar platform to our political party in America, the Tax Wall Street Party, and we are endorsing you. Tell us what the name of this district is, because I can never pronounce it correctly.
Yes, so Daniela, thanks a lot for having me on the show. It is South Basildon and East Thurrock. It's actually a new district that was just created in the last election, and it's right down in South Essex. Essex is the overall county, and that's about 50 minutes from central London, so I'm right in the thick of things here.
So would we commonly know that as Essex or South Essex?
Yes, Essex, yeah.
Okay, but aren't there other districts within Essex?
Yeah.
So you're one district within Essex?
Yeah. I think what my area needs is some hope for a higher purpose and hopefully striving towards something that would be great.
What would you say about the other candidates for MP in your district, and what sorts of things are they promising? Does that appeal to people, or are the people left feeling a lot of malaise about their political choices? Sort of what, as you're stepping into this race, is it a vacuum of leadership and ideas, would you say?
Yeah, so the current incumbent is a guy called Stephen McCarthy. He's conservative, so in the current government. He's one of a handful of people that have never rebelled or voted against the Conservative Party line. So he is trying to advance a political career, I would say, in that fashion. I spoke to a taxi driver just last week who said to me that he and other people he knows in the area are tired with these professional politicians and people that are quite literally just in it for themselves and the very specific interests of their party. So I think what I'm trying to do is stand up and provide a real alternative for people that isn't tied down to towing a party line or trying to appeal to some very specific special interest group. I'm trying to put forward a program and direction that can take people where they want to be and not just dragged down following behind a party that does not represent them.
That's interesting what the taxi driver said. Nobody wants these career politicians in office, unfortunately, and every single politician running against you is a career politician in one regard, that they'll do anything to court Wall Street because they know they simply can't win, and the responsibility has to be on the voters to stop going with the people who have glitzy TV ads. You need to start to realize who's bought and paid for and who's not, and look for the one who's not. Otherwise, there's no hope for the non-career politicians.
Stuart, we saw on your Facebook page there were some interesting comments. I saw one from a guy who said something like, "I've never voted before because I don't believe in it, and this is the first time I'm actually considering doing it." Are you getting a lot of feedback of that nature from people who are surprised to see somebody without political experience and with these kind of ideas willing to step into a race?
Yeah, definitely. I've received pretty much 100% support from everybody I know. So, and I think it is just because it's somebody who, not necessarily that they know personally, but somebody that they can identify as not being a corrupted career politician in it for themselves or their party and the special interests that their party represents. So hopefully I can provide that real alternative. Hopefully we'll have a program and manifesto that will appeal to people in my district and also to a wider national and even international audience as well. So as well as helping out my local district, that we can start a national and international conversation about the kinds of things we can go about doing to solve the problems that we are facing in the world today.
Let's talk about the program. One thing that I'm curious about is our program is based on the American system of political economy, which, even though most American voters are not terribly familiar with it, you can at least sort of reference certain historical points in American history and say, well, Lincoln did this, FDR did this, George Washington did this. What's kind of the zeitgeist of British politics, and how do you connect what you want to do, which is, tax the London banks, nationalize the central bank, and these kinds of things, in a country where maybe that has a different kind of a tradition? What would you say is the British political tradition that you're trying to draw from, and how do you get people to recognize it?
Draw from a tradition, so to speak. From my point of view, it's all the current leaders have no real sense of direction, and they have no understanding of how they can fund any of their so-called great ideas. The Labour leader, Ed Miliband, admits that there are going to be cuts, but that they should be smart cuts. So you're still going to be under austerity with the Labour Party. The Conservative leader is constantly referencing the past and how he inherited a mess that he's now having to deal with, and obviously austerity is the only way that he can possibly fix it. And that's kind of similar to some of the rhetoric I've seen Obama throwing around, particularly during his first term as president, where he inherited a mess and using somewhat as a get-out-of-jail-free card. You also have UK Independence Party at the moment, which is somewhat popular, but also has a very large base of people attacking it as well, because their stance, this is Nigel Farage. People in America have probably heard of him. He's popular in libertarian circles. His main deal is that all of our problems stem back to immigration.
Well, that's interesting, because that's happening here too. In the economic crisis, people scapegoat immigrants.
Yeah, so in this debate just last week, he said something along the lines that essentially amounted to anybody coming to the UK with AIDS should not be treated. They should essentially be thrown back onto the boat and sent back to wherever they came from. So this is the kind of person who's representing the UK Independence Party.
It's interesting that in Europe it seems like the status quo has just been neoliberalism and budget cutting, but then what is coming to fill the void, on one side you've got Syriza and people like yourself starting to try to build, I don't know what you'd call them, but, to build anti-financier movements. I don't want to call them nationalist movements. On the other side you have sort of nationalist/fascist movements, like, you've got Geert Wilders in Amsterdam, and the Golden Dawn in Greece, and UKIP and the National Front, and some of these parties that maybe can appeal to mainstream people on one level, but then on another level, it's like a resurgence of 1920s fascism.
Yeah, that's funny, though. That's the question. Who's going to win out? Is it going to be the fascists or the national dirigists, sort of the anti-finance oligarchy bloc? Or is it going to be the Nazi scapegoating immigrants and the poor people bloc? Human beings can go one of two ways. They can rise higher and say the issue are the bankers and we're going to go after central bankers, or the issue are immigrants.
And there are different flavors of all of that stuff too, and I think in America maybe even the immigration card might not play so well, because we have been dealing with this issue since the 50s and 60s, or this was always sort of a land of immigrants.
The number one and two issue in the country right now, people are getting out of bed to vote in the presidential election in 2016 for two issues, and you'd be surprised what they are. Number one is anti-immigration. And number two is anti-Obamacare. Those are the number one and two issues in our country right now, Kyle.
Right.
We also have immigrants from quite literally all over the world, mainly thanks to the British Empire, which obviously brought people in from all corners of the world where the empire had its reach. But one interesting thing you mentioned about neoliberalism. So neoliberalism is the economic theory that any kind of government interference in the economy can only lead to bad things, such as inefficiency and therefore lack of profits. So it's interesting to me how this neoliberal Washington consensus that has been applied around the world for probably around 40 years now, 30, 40 years, as I said, completely removes government activity from the economic sphere. However, when the so-called great free markets get into trouble, who is the first person that the banks come running to? Governments. My overall plan here is to not just use the power of government economically to support banks and very specific interests and bail them out when they're in crisis, but also to bail out the citizens of a country when they're in crisis. There's absolutely no reason why, if you can bail out a very small segment of the, not even society, but part of the economy, I suppose, that you cannot bail out another part of the economy, such as the healthcare system, the education system, or anything like that. So I think that's the direction we need to be heading in.
Tell us about the British economy. I wonder, I think a central part of this whole program of reforms has to do with using the central bank or using the regulatory system as an engine of actual growth, where on one hand you do need to stop austerity and you need to support a social safety net, but on the other hand, what can you do to support physical production, manufacturing, agriculture? What could you see as a hopeful future for your district? And then just as the British economy as a whole, how can it move from being centered on, like America is, on financial services, the fire sector, finance, real estate, insurance, and move back toward a manufacturing economy?
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that neoliberalism did, particularly under Thatcher and Reagan, the dual Anglo-American neoliberal leaders. I think what we need to do is look to reindustrialize, as you just said. In my district in particular, there was an oil refinery, and that was recently closed down and is in the process of demolition. Now, an oil refinery requires many highly skilled, highly qualified, and also highly paid workers. And now those workers in my district are now having to move to Scotland, and some have even gone as far as Saudi Arabia to find work. Now, that is completely unacceptable. There's no reason why we cannot have such high value and highly qualified industries right here where local people need these high-skilled jobs. So I think that's one of the ways we need to go about reindustrializing, is thinking about energy.
What's the alternative move in it? Is it towards solar and wind there?
Yeah, things of that nature, yeah. Wind power is just a joke, to be perfectly honest. The setup costs for it are incredibly high, and it is impossible to get wind turbines to ever output at 100% of their capacity. It's just physically impossible to do. So it makes a lot more sense to invest the money into energy technologies that you can achieve near 100% capacity.
Yeah, we agree. It uses more energy to build one of those giant white windmills than it ever produces in its lifetime.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's the difference between your campaign platform and, for instance, the Green Party? I'm assuming it's similar to the difference between our candidates here in America.
The Green Party is essentially positioning itself as an anti-austerity party, and they do have a lot of very good program points, but unfortunately they don't have really any idea of how to pay for them. That's why their party leader was called out for having the worst party leader interview of all time just a couple of weeks back.
Really? Your Green Party leader had the worst party interview of all time?
Yes, because she did not know how to pay for her idea to build new homes.
Wow, how embarrassing. So your Green Party doesn't have nationalized the Bank of England. At least our Green Party has nationalized the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, it has like just end austerity, but yeah, that's about it. They really need this 1% City of London financial tax.
Yeah.
And the, as you say, nationalising the Bank of England.
Mm-hmm. So your Bank of England is not nationalised. It's private like our Federal Reserve.
It's not technically private, but you can define nationalised in many different ways. You could say it's nationalised to support the national banks. It is not nationalised to support the nation's people. So there's a very big semantic difference there.
And back to the Green Party, it reminds me of what we talked about last week with Chuy Garcia in Chicago running for a mayoral race, where if you don't have it's a real question. How are you going to pay for something? You can't just come in and say, I oppose X unless you've got an alternative. And that seems to be the lesson that is coming up again and again, and why the quote-unquote left wing is declining at the same time that fascist movements are on the rise, because at least they've got an answer, which is smash immigrants.
You could say that having any answer is better than no answer at all.
Yeah, it has to be the last straw. What happened in Chicago with Chuy Garcia, it was so embarrassing. If you watch those 3 debates, each one of them, he was just smashed by Rahm Emanuel for not having an answer for how to pay for it. And it was so embarrassing. I don't think the left. I think the left's gonna have to learn a lesson from this. But yeah, exactly. Having some answer is better than having no answer at all. Because he just sat there silent. It was crickets. It was terrible, super embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly. Russell Brand also along the same kind of lines. He is from a town that is only 10 minutes down the road from where I live here in Essex. He lives in Grays, or he's from Grays. I don't think he lives there anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, he is vastly different to me in that he is an ultra-left radical, and he's interested in wealth redistribution and spiritualism. So again, we have no real program of how to pay for anything, just crazy ideas that are plucked out of the air and strung up in an interesting fashion that appeals to people with little political understanding themselves.
How much appeal would you say he really has in your area or in the country in general?
He's quite divisive, to be honest. There are a lot more mainstream news articles and opinions coming out calling for him to stand in the election himself, because if these ideas are so great, his spiritualism and wealth redistribution, why not put them on the ballot? He could afford it. He's a multimillionaire. It would be essentially pennies out of his pocket to do it, and it wouldn't really cause him any harm at all, except the fact that he's obviously concerned that he'll get so few votes that he'll become a national laughingstock.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. He's afraid he's going to get so few votes that he's going to become a laughingstock. But instead he says, I don't want to run because I don't want to become one of them. Which that answer is getting really tired. That answer is not working anymore. He's no longer can use that as a punchline. When he was forced by Farage, well, I'm afraid if I win, I'll become one of them. What?
It's just pathetic.
No.
It's no excuse at all. If you know yourself and you know what you stand for and what you believe in, there's absolutely no reason why you should allow yourself to be corrupted.
Right. It was just funny to me that it was even that he would even suggest that there was a possibility he could be corrupted, meaning somebody who knows themselves can't get corrupted. There would be no way it would even cross my mind to have the thought that if I got into office, I'd suddenly become corrupted. If he's such a great revolutionary, quote unquote, and is out daily fighting for the people, then how is he suddenly going to get corrupted because he steps into a new venue?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that his book is called Revolution. So he is portraying himself as this kind of revolutionary leader, so why not try and actually lead?
Right, so you're a revolutionary leader who the second that he crosses the threshold into Parliament is going to become one of them? Then you're officially not allowed to call yourself a revolutionary anymore if you're telling us that you're so weak that the second that you step into a new geographical location, you're going to get corrupted. Could it be that he's so susceptible to corruption as it is, that he's already one of the City of London Fabian Society banker, London School of Economics puppets anyway.
That's the obvious conclusion, as we've talked about at length, and it brings up this whole idea of the counter gang or the counter movement or the, what do you call them, the Delphic version, where you recognize, you being the bankers, recognize the inevitability of an anti-banker political movement, and so you create something that looks like an anti-banker political movement and is designed to self-destruct and kill any momentum that would have been available to a real movement.
Like, to explain to the audience, like a Delphic version, or what Kyle's talking about, of the Wall Street sales tax would be the Robin Hood tax, which, if you look on who's behind it on their website, you get to page 3, it's Paul Volcker, Larry Summers. It's all the Wall Street bankers that caused the crisis in the first place.
And it comes out of Oxfam.
Yeah,
Oxfam is kind of like the Red Cross of the UK. It's involved in a lot of eugenics stuff in its history.
But they put up glitzy ads of a banker. Who was the actor who played that banker?
Bill Nighy. That's Nighiy.
I guess he's famous in England. Anyway, they did a fancy ad where he plays a banker, and the ads went viral. And it's a big Oxfam, which is their private charity, the banker's private charity, funded tax, which is made to look like a Wall Street sales tax. On the first page, it says 0.5% on stocks. Most of what's traded on the stock exchanges are not stocks anymore, they're derivatives, and it's 0.003% on derivatives. So that's really what you want to get. So the point is, it's made to look like a Wall Street sales tax, and it's got everybody hooked with their fancy ads. If it's implemented, it'll only give a few $1 billion as opposed to trillions, and also slow down high-frequency trading, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of reasons why it's inferior. Not even close.
And then the big problem is the same thing with Russell Brand. It's if you come out with a half-hearted demand and pour a bunch of media exposure into it and whatever, it's not a strong enough demand to get people on the ground excited. But if it's going to fail, then it fails and no momentum is built and everyone is scared to try it again. It's kind of the same thing with, there's a threat that Stuart, yourself, I think someone comes out saying, I'm an independent voice and I'm going to do this and that. Then people are going to associate it with, here comes another Russell Brand.
Yeah.
Russell Brand just basically comes out and burns the bridge that people need to cross over into the mainstream. It actually comes out of British intelligence.
Yeah, it's a British intelligence tactic that is implemented by the CIA, which is, there are third parties here in America that are meant to be wrecking operations that will take on a left-wing issue so that they can make it look foolish and put up candidates who are silly and nobody in America likes, and take an issue and make sure it fails so that anytime somebody, though, comes forward to support that issue again, they say, oh, was that the issue that the freaks supported? We're all victims of British intelligence and CIA tactics. We're all victims of psychological operations, all of us. And it's so hard to get out from under this stuff. It's just layers upon layers, generations of being victims of psychological
operations. Yeah, the British intelligence officer who popularized this was named Frank Kitson, and had this book, I think it was called Low Intensity Operations, and he talks about using this where there were nationalist movements that would pop up in different parts of the British Empire. What was it, the Mau Mau in Africa, and where they would basically create a counter gang who would look and sound a lot like the authentic movement, but was basically, was spearheaded by a crazy person and was designed to be defeated and discredited and basically take the whole idea with them. It's like the difference between Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, where it's easy to paint Hezbollah, which is like an authentic political movement, as Al-Qaeda or as, whatever, any number of movements in the Middle East. It's just kind of, you create a facsimile that is designed to paint the real thing poorly.
Well, on that Robin Hood tax The fact that Larry Summers supports that should tell you absolutely everything you need to know about that movement. Because Larry Summers is the guy who, when he was the chief economist of the World Bank, sent a memo saying that it was a great idea to dump toxic waste in third world countries for the economic benefits that it could produce. And in this memo, he said, just between you and me, shouldn't the World Bank be encouraging more migration of the dirty industries to the lesser developed countries? So this is a guy that is sought to destroy developing countries for the economic benefits. And the fact that Oxfam is supporting that, you need to start questioning the motives of all of these people involved with anything that includes Larry Summers.
But the point is to get to the place where you see that Larry Summers supports it. That's about 5 pages in. I'm closely connected to this because we run the Tax Wall Street Party. The average person's not going to get to 5 pages deep into the website through different links to find out who's behind it. Click the link that says who's behind it.
Yeah, well, you can see that, and you can say that, yeah, sure, regular people might not find that. But when you have these large charities supporting something like that, and they should be responsible for checking out things of that nature. And when they support it anyway, you have to then start questioning them as well.
Start looking at Oxfam's donor list.
Exactly.
Or do a Google search for Oxfam and eugenics, and you're going to start to see some things that are very much along those lines. It's the same kind of thing, just under the cover of humanitarian aid, exporting neoliberalism, exporting your toxic sewage and your toxic industries to the third world. It's a false front.
And also, we were talking about the Green Party's energy program, and it's wind and solar. Wind and solar is so dangerous when you export it to the third world. It really is not the solution. You want to get them on the grid, because shipping a person, let's say living in a hut, a solar panel, it's just going to hold them back forever because they can only do so much with it. And these things are extremely expensive. They break. I was traveling through Mexico for a few months recently, going to the rural areas in Mexico where charities had done this. They had given very poor Mexicans living in the country a solar panel each or a small windmill. And the things were just broken. They break, you know? There's so many apparatuses to get it completely. There's like a battery pack, you know what I mean, and wires, and the windmill, you know, needs oil and connected to batteries, and it's just so hard to maintain this really expensive piece of equipment. And also, when they have it, it goes on and off. So they can only power one thing at a time, whether that's a small refrigerator or their lights. And it's just an excuse not to get them on the grid. Why aren't these charities fighting to get these people on the grid?
All of these developing countries need a full-blown infrastructure and industrialization program.
Exactly. That's what I was
They do not need just a random solar panel, as you say. It's just a complete joke. I mean, we need to start thinking about getting these people in Africa clean water. If you're worried about the Ebola epidemic, let's not develop a vaccine. That's just going to target the symptom, not the cause of the problem. The cause of the problem is that Africa is lacking the vital infrastructure it needs to provide the sanitation, the healthcare, the electricity that it needs to be able to eradicate disease, full stop, as we've mostly, to a great extent at least, been able to do in the developed world.
And the solutions that are coming from Oxfam is who's collecting the Robin Hood tax, right? Would be to take the money from the City of London transaction tax, the small amount that they're asking for, take that, you know, in the hands of their private charity and create a little water pump that's solar paneled that works some days and doesn't work others. What we need is big infrastructure, dams, irrigation systems to turn these places into the same type of infrastructure that you have in your home in America.
Exactly. And the entire continent of Africa should be fully developed by this point, but as you can see, due to neoliberalism and people like Larry Summers in the World Bank, it's far from it.
And they're using the City of London transaction tax, which should go to support your social safety net, build affordable housing, create infrastructure, let's say, if they wanted to in Africa. They're using it to continue to hold them down for another generation.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is going to create the flood of immigration into your country, because who wants to live in absolute poverty and squalor?
Yeah, you can't exactly blame people for wanting to get out of that. The overall so-called immigration problem, though, is just a reflection of a job market problem. There are simply not enough jobs. So my policies seeking to reindustrialize, seeking to rebuild infrastructure will create so many jobs that we might even have a labour shortage. All these people coming here through the immigration system will actually be more than benefiting when they get here, because they'll have a hell of a lot of work to be doing.
We want the two-pronged approach, though. We want to make sure that their country's on the road to improving, so they would want to stay there. We want those infrastructure jobs in Africa, and we want them in England and in America. Mexicans wouldn't leave Mexico if there were infrastructure jobs. If they were building a maglev rail, which they were just starting, that got curtailed for various reasons. But from Mexico to a state called Querétaro, the Chinese were working with the Mexican government to build a maglev, connecting those two states. It was stopped. But if stuff like that was being built, Mexicans wouldn't leave. Mexico is trying to build toward being a middle-class economy. They have this Chiapas movement, which is, I believe that what's that guy's name? Comandante Marcos is a European. If he takes off his black masks, which is ridiculous in 100-degree heat in southern Mexico, nobody would wear a black wool mask. But if you take that off, he's a blue-eyed European. This is a psychological operation to keep down Mexico. Mexico has a lot of potential. Central bankers have always been trying to keep down Mexico. If you modernize Mexico and nobody would leave.
And look at who is there helping them. It's the Chinese. They're doing the same thing in Africa. They're trying to do, South America has similar issues going on. If you are in America or the UK, you need to be asking yourself, well, wait a minute, can't we outthink, outwork, out-engineer the Chinese, who their economy is based on a lot of hard work, but mostly based on the ingenuity of things that came out of places like America and the UK. This is not a racial issue or something, but the point is that anyone is capable of developing an educational system, developing I think people underestimate the importance of human capital. Why can't Mexico or Africa, pull themselves up by their bootstraps by themselves? Well, it's because they don't have a developed system of education. They don't have, like the Chinese, basically there's no place where an influx of enterprising young people can come and get an education in engineering and can learn how to do this stuff for themselves. So it's like the Chinese are practicing a new form of soft imperialism where they are able to have a win-win situation where they help develop Africa and they also get some benefit out of it. And so why should we let the Chinese run around the world making things better and making a profit while we're sitting here hoping that Wall Street will trickle down to us? It's just crazy. And meanwhile, like Stuart, you were talking earlier about the idea of an oil refinery and what happens to all of these highly skilled individuals, where when those guys go to Saudi Arabia, you don't just get them back. It's not like 15-year-olds or 18-year-olds get out of high school and know how to refine oil. If all they've learned is video games and whatever else, they're going to end up in the service sector. So it's just, I think it's turning from, it's becoming like an emergency, the need to redevelop these kinds of skills and knowledge and infrastructure. It's not just physical infrastructure, but it's what is your labor force capable of doing, and then do you have centralized direction to make sure that they've got the financing to do it.
Well, since Kennedy, we haven't even competed with this mindset of a peace race or anything like that. Support the bankers and hold everybody down with psychological operations and war and what?
Agriculture. I mean, that's a big thing in the U.S. anyway. It's kind of, we export cheap grain. Other nations become addicted to it, and then they provide cheap labor for us, and they consume our cheap products. But I think that whole thing is starting to change. I think actually this, the Lausanne Accords in Iran are an interesting development, and you can start to see the outlines of where international cooperation might go. And you have to start really thinking of what does a multipolar world look like when people are expected not to just, threaten each other with nuclear war, but are expected to have a peace race, to compete for economic development and compete to be the ones providing infrastructure and providing education to the developing world. And
I guess here's my question, though. When we were talking about the maglev from Mexico City to Querétaro, the Americans were actively doing what they could to stop that development because they didn't want an example of a maglev so close to the United States. So they were actively trying to stop that while the Chinese were actively trying to build it. Why were we trying to stop that? What is with the British-American?
Because our companies, the Chinese companies, are owned by the state. And I'm not saying we should nationalize all companies, but if you look at, I think it's Shanghai Electric is a company that you go look at like the holdings of the companies they own. They bought America's biggest printing press manufacturer. They bought America's biggest, like the company that makes escalators, just all this kind of weird stuff like that. Where basically it's like a state-managed portfolio where then they are buying the intellectual property, they're buying the capital equipment, and all this kind of stuff. But who owns our companies? Who owns the American, or who owns the maquiladoras in Mexico? It's not going to be, some industrial capitalist, but it's going to be hedge funds like Bain Capital or BlackRock and Blackstone, or you know what I mean? It's because when there were sort of oil wars going on between like Texaco and Pennzoil, and you start to see the Bush crew is basically a Wall Street operation, and they come in and take over productive interests. So we don't anymore have industrial corporations interested in output. We have corporations that are owned by hedge funds, and the hedge funds have all kinds of different interests because they also own competitive companies and competitive interests in other countries, so that their interests do not align with the national interests. They don't even align necessarily with the interests of the companies that they own. It's like a whole portfolio of interlocking interests, and their only long-term interest is profit, and it has nothing to do with national borders.
People need to train themselves to look for is not what seems good, on the surface. Because the Robinhood tax has great ads. You've got to really look deeply at the program. And we've got to start to look at candidates who have a program that has some meat, is in our best interest. People need to start voting in their best interest. And people don't do that. That's one of the strangest things. The question, why don't people vote in their best interests? And people need to start voting. Getting rid of Obamacare, I mean, if that's the number one issue in America, I don't know how that, and not Obamacare is not the answer, Medicare for all is, but how does that suit the average person? It's so weird that that's like their number one issue. That's just pure demagoguery. That's the right just saying, it's socialism, get out of bed, it's socialism. And instead of voting, why wouldn't the number one issue be re-regulating Wall Street?
Well, and part of it is your definition of self-interest. If you look at the standard libertarian might be self-employed service worker, like they're in, they sell real estate or something like that. Mm-hmm. And all they're looking at is Obamacare increased my premiums, therefore we got to get rid of it. Or, I think a lot of people are motivated by racism or hatred of the left or whatever it is. But I think the question is your self-interest defined by what you, the individual, are doing with your life right now, what you need right now, or is it about the interest of generations to come, or the national interest? And I think that's part of what we need to get at, is just thinking of your self-interest in a larger context and trying to identify why the national interest is also in your interest, if by that you mean.
I just can't understand why everybody's first self-interest isn't re-regulating Wall Street. Because people don't know the amount of money that's at stake.
And they don't have good candidates out there, and they don't have the media out there telling them. So I guess that's where we start, is in races like this one.
So Stuart, let's talk about your platform.
So I'm running as essentially a general anti-austerity candidate. It's a program of cuts to public services that has failed now, not just in the UK, but throughout Europe. And we've also seen anti-austerity forces rise and come to power in Greece, and are now on the horizon in Spain as well. So these cuts only really target the working class and leave the city banks responsible for the crisis untouched. So that's something that I think really needs to change. And one of the main things we can do to start changing that is look to strengthen, not just simply protect, the National Health Service, which is the public health service that the UK has for its citizens. It's currently in a process of privatisation in certain aspects, and also massive cuts are being made to budgets to buy drugs. So people are being left without their life-saving medication simply to meet a budget target. That is something that is completely unacceptable.
You mean prescriptions?
Yeah, cancer drugs that people need to survive. They are now being cut and not funded, so people will not be able to get them. And that is simply just to make the budget balance out, so to speak.
So what the Republicans say here, if we nationalized our healthcare system, there's death panels. That's sort of a reality in England, because they let people die.
Yes, somewhat. Yes, absolutely.
And so we need to make sure that there's no long lines, that there's no waiting, that there's no cut.
Yeah, that's a huge problem over
here. And there's no restrictions on what type of care you can get.
Yeah. We need to remove all those waiting times and restrictions. If you don't have enough hospitals, you don't have enough doctors, you don't have enough ambulances, the best solution would be to create more of all of those things, not to try and ration them. That's an irrational response. So along with that, we would need free university education as well. That's something that Germany managed to achieve just last year. Under the current government, university fees were tripled, which I think has contributed to people in my district, young kids, not wanting to go to university because of this huge debt burden that they face when trying to do so. That free university education will train the new doctors that we need for the NHS. It will train the highly skilled workers we need to reindustrialise and rebuild the infrastructure. So it's a win-win for the economy overall.
What would you say is the average tuition cost for a public university in the UK?
It would cost £9,000 per year for tuition. So that's 3 years of tuition that you need to pay for. So £27,000 just for tuition alone. So you're looking at around $50,000 there. And then you also got the cost of living in the UK, which is estimated at around £12,000 per year. So again, that's another 3 years. So that's £36,000 just for living costs, plus your £27,000 tuition fees. And you're looking at £63,000 worth of debt.
And you have student loans there like we have?
Yes.
What would you guess is like an average starting salary for a university graduate? Hey, Stuart's trying to get through the program and we're just bombarding him with math questions.
But like, how many derivatives go through?
What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
So the expected graduate salary here depends a lot on the industry that you go into, but it's around £20,000 a year. So you're looking at well over 3 years, and that's if you contribute every single penny that you earn towards your student loan, which is obviously not possible. So that's something that needs to go. Along with that, we also have welfare sanctions right now. So people are being forced to work for their welfare. This has been dubbed workfare, and this is a system that is a complete attack on the unemployed. And to me, makes absolutely no sense at all, because if there's a place that somebody can be working and doing something of a productive nature, why can they not simply be paid a salary for doing that? Why is it necessary to do that to receive welfare? That does not make any sense at all. It's almost as if the unemployed are being used as cheap labor by companies.
Yeah, it sounds like slave labor.
Scheme. Exactly. And a lot of people on this scheme have been stacking shelves. So
what does that mean?
The claim, like literally in a supermarket, stacking shelves. And so the claim that this gives them work experience is a complete joke.
Yeah, that should be a minimum wage job. And if anything should happen on welfare, it should be job training. Like
exactly. And
vocational schooling.
Yeah, those sanctions have led to suicides. Now, 60 of those are being officially investigated by the Department for Work and Pensions. Yeah, I've seen estimates of up to 1,000 austerity-related suicides.
Oy.
So, yeah, it's getting very real over here. Apparently, homelessness in London is also up 79% since the current government has been in power.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and we also need to look to financial re-regulation. We've touched a little on that in the discussion already. That's something that needs to be done to reel in neoliberalism and bring it under control. And along with that, we need a minimum wage that is at least a living wage. So the people that we do have in minimum wage jobs, of which there are many, can actually earn a living and can support themselves on those low-wage jobs. We obviously want them to be able to break out of those as well and go on to bigger and better things. But while they are there, they should be able to live on what they earn.
Right. We want to help you now, Stuart. Let's go through what we need to do. You have this special service that we don't have in America, where your post office, which is called Royal Mail, will mail out for free one piece of mail, which is a leaflet, to everybody in your voting district. That's 71,000 people, which is an amazing service that you guys get. But they don't pay for the cost of producing the mail. Your campaign laws, which are different than ours in America, say that if it's under 50 pounds, it can come from anywhere in the world.
Yes, it does not. It's not an official donation.
If you're anywhere outside of the UK, donate to Stuart on his Facebook page.
Yes, okay. So on the Facebook page there is a link to a fundraiser where you will be able to donate anything up to a value of 49 Great British pounds.
Which is about $75. This is going to be to help you produce the best quality flyers so that you can blow away the competition, which is the Labour, which equals our Democrat, or the Conservative, which equals our Republican, so you can blow those guys out of the water.
Also UKIP as well.
Also UKIP. There was one other party. What were they, the Liberal Democrats running?
Yeah.
None of these parties are good. They're all awful. Stuart, can you give us all the coordinates, what your Facebook page is?
Yes, so if you head to Facebook and put in the search box Stuart Hooper for Parliament, you'll be able to find my Facebook page where you can just join our little community, hit like, and also you can fundraise there as well to help me produce these really awesome leaflets and hopefully win a lot of votes from those leaflets. You can also just type in the address bar facebook.com/Hooper for MP, HOOPERFORMP, and that will also take you to the Facebook page. You can also follow me on Twitter at Stuart J. Hooper, and there I will be posting regular updates on the campaign as well.
So you're not Britain's only anti-austerity candidate, but you're the only anti-austerity candidate that has a program for how to pay for it, which is the most important part of the entire equation anyway.
Exactly. Quite literally the only candidate in the entire country running on a platform to not only tax the financial institutions of the City of London, but also make that Bank of England work for the citizens by nationalising it effectively.
Anybody out there who's drawn in by the charisma of a Russell Brand and thinks that this is a revolutionary leader, take a look at Stuart. He's just qualitatively better in every regard. He comes from the same area, but this is the type of candidate like Alexis Tsipras that we haven't seen in generations. Somebody who's not out for himself, that's you, Stuart, but is in service to an economic program where these are, I've said repeatedly on our shows, these are guys who are not career politicians out for themselves. These are people who are in service to an economic platform or economic program that is designed to get us out of this global depression that we're in caused by the bankers. I can vouch for that, and I think Kyle can too. In our political party in America, the Tax Wall Street Party, and our organization, the United Front Against Austerity, has gotten to know you and know that you're similar to an Alexis Tsipras, which we stood behind Alexis Tsipras when the left wasn't there 3 years ago, and we've been saying that this guy's the real deal from the beginning, and he's proved to be so far, and I'm certain he will continue to be that person because that's who he is. You've got something real here. Take a chance and be on the right side of history, I would say. Let's summarize where we are up until now. Okay, so you are a candidate for Parliament in the South Basildon East Thurrock district of Essex, England. You are the youngest candidate for Parliament in this district. You are the only true anti-austerity candidate that we can find in the United Kingdom, and this is why the Tax Wall Street Party is endorsing your candidacy. Unlike others who use austerity as a talking point and jobs as a talking point, Stuart has a way to actually pay, and that is by taxing the City of London at 1% and nationalising the Bank of England.
Exactly.
So, Stuart, will you give an overview of your candidacy?
So, yeah, my candidacy, I'm the youngest candidate running here, as you mentioned, Daniela. I attended a school here, and I've lived in my town in the district for my entire life. I earned a Bachelor's degree of Honours at the Open University, and at the moment I'm studying for a Master's degree in International Politics at City University, London, and hopefully going on to do a PhD after that, unless I get elected, of course, and then an MP will be my life for the next 5 years. Why I'm running is because there is currently no real option for me to vote for myself. The Conservative government has implemented a regime of destructive austerity measures and has quite literally failed to tackle numerous political and financial scandals. The HSBC scandal was a very big one, which a lot of your listeners will probably have heard about. The Labour Party admits that they're going to continue austerity cuts, and it's going to take them until 2020, 5 years' time, to actually reach their minimum wage target of £8 an hour. So that is a ridiculous amount of time to have to wait to get that done. UKIP, they have no real solutions.
The equivalent of your Democrats are saying they're not going to raise the minimum wage to £8 until 2020.
Yeah, they're saying it's going to take them that long for it to actually happen.
And we'll see if it even happens by then. This waiting thing never made sense to me.
No, there's no more time to be waiting. We need to start doing things now.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to do. And yeah, UKIP, they have no real solutions at all. This is Nigel Farage's party. All they want to do is blame all of the problems on immigrants and EU regulations, just pure scapegoating. The Liberal Democrats are basically completely out of the race. One of their leaflets came through my door today and it looked like it was made on Microsoft Paint.
Made on what? Microsoft Paint?
Yeah, absolutely. So they are out of the race, and the Green Party, who is positioning themselves as like an anti-austerity force, hasn't even shown up in my district. They don't even have a candidate here. So I am literally the only real anti-austerity candidate that people in my district can vote for. So hopefully I'm somebody worth supporting.
Well, we think you're the true anti-austerity candidate in the whole of England. The Greens have not shown up in your district, but in the whole of England, the Greens have their energy austerity, which is really troubling how that affects the third world. So I wouldn't call them anti-austerity if they're consumed with energy austerity. But how far have austerity measures gone in the UK? If you could just provide a little more technicolor.
So there have been austerity suicides in the UK, which is completely unacceptable. So all of these austerity measures need to end immediately. Sanctions on welfare and things like the bedroom tax, which is the tax on people in social housing not occupying all of the bedrooms in that social housing. They have received a tax for that.
Can you explain that? Just what do you mean not occupying the bedrooms?
So say I live in social housing and I have 3 bedrooms in that house. I will be taxed for the 2 bedrooms that I'm not occupying. That is just an attack on the most vulnerable people in our society, the unemployed, the sick, the elderly, the disabled. All of these people need to be cared for, not simply cut out of the budget. That's completely unacceptable. And while the banks have been bailed out, the people have been left with quite literally nothing. So we need to turn that situation around.
So do you have an equivalent of a Detroit in the UK?
Well, the north of England has suffered the most from deindustrialisation. Down here, we lost a oil refinery in my district, which was one of the worst decisions that has ever happened here. There's been reports of local, highly skilled, highly trained workers having to move as far away as Scotland and even Saudi Arabia to find new jobs. That's completely unacceptable. We need to cherish that kind of industry, maintain it and develop it, and ensure that we keep those high-paying, high-skilled jobs here in our local area. And in regards to the overall infrastructure, we have streets that need to be repaved, we have streetlights that are collapsing, and schools and hospitals need to be rebuilt and expanded, because right now there are huge waiting lists for kids to get into their first-choice schools, and also huge waiting times at hospitals, both completely unacceptable.
Then how are you going to pay for all your ideas one more time?
So we need a 1% City of London financial transaction tax. So it's not a wealth tax or anything on individuals or even small businesses. This isn't an attack on them at all. This is a 1% tax on all the trading done by financial institutions in the City of London, the big players in the game.
This is a tax on the banks, not a tax on the rich. This is not a wealth tax.
Exactly.
People always confuse that. I see those comments on Facebook every day. People say, good for you and your wealth tax. This is not a wealth tax, it's a transaction tax. The same as when you buy a cup of coffee. We have about 1 minute left, Stuart, so we have to wrap up. If you have any final words.
Thank you for having me on.
You've been listening to United Front Radio with Stuart J. Hooper for Parliament in, help me out with saying the district again, Stuart.
South Basildon and East Thurrock.
If you want to be active, you want to call yourself an activist, it's time to stand up and help Stuart. He's gotten on the ballot already. It's time to help him get elected. Do everything you can. That's what real activism is. It's working to get our people into political office to take real political power. The candidates who have the people's best interest, not the bankers' best interest and power, need to start doing that now. That's the future. If it's not the future, well, bye-bye humanity. So have a nice evening, everybody.
The time for protest is over. I would just add, the time to take power is now. It's the only way that we're going to actually change things, by getting into office where the power lies.
Very, very well said. I think we'll even start using that line at the Tax Wall Street Party. Exactly, the time for all this circular, never-ending activism is over. It's so tired. Now are the days to take power. I'm going to steal that. Good night, Stuart. Good night, Kyle.